Okay, it's a couple of minutes after 1. We're going to go ahead and get started.
Hey, thank you for joining us, everybody. I'm sorry, I was on mute and I did not realize. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. We are going to go ahead and get started. As a note, this meeting will be recorded. Our goal is to make this format as welcoming to meaningful input and participation as possible. And as a note, just a reminder to please connect your audio. Unless you dialed in or had the meeting dial out to you, we will not be able to hear you. The dial-in information can be found in the top right audio information box, or you can click the phone icon in the top control bar to connect your audio. As a reminder, the chat box is located in the bottom right corner of the screen, so please feel free to use that chat box at any point during the meeting to ask questions or make comments. There will be some set points during this presentation where we'll go through the questions, or you can unmute and ask your comment or say your comment, ask your question aloud. So at this point, I'll turn the meeting over to Jenny to kick us off.
Thanks, Victoria, and thanks, everybody, for joining us today. I know that Sarah passed out a reminder to update your Adobe Connect because I think over this last week they must have done a pretty big update that gave some people some headaches. So it looks like everybody's in and going smoothly, but as she mentioned, this meeting is being recorded. And if you do have any comments you want to speak but aren't connected through the audio, please use the chat box and we'll address those accordingly. So let's go ahead and get started. Sarah, are there any comments or regards you would like to make as we get started today?
No, I think I'm good, Jenny. Just want to say welcome to everyone. Thank you again for your time this afternoon. We got some great updates to give and continued analysis on our freight plan. And you can take it away, Jenny. Thank you.
Sure thing. Thank you. So this is the 4th meeting of our Freight Advisory Committee within the BCD Regional Freight Mobility Plan. My name's Jenny Humphreys. I'm managing this project together with lots of my colleagues within CDM Smith and our teaming partners at Transsystems and Modern Mobility. With me today, you will hear from Krista Gooden, Wade Luther, and Adam, all colleagues of mine within CDM Smith, as we talk through. We're going to talk a lot about performance measures and goals and objectives and all these good things around which we shape our plan. And just to refresh everyone's memory and those of you who have not participated in other meetings, I'll get you caught up on where we've been over the last few months since we first got started. We did get started as a technical team back in March, but we did not roll out our meetings until June because of obvious disruptions in our community and society in general. And coming into this format, we started these meetings in early June. In that first meeting, we gave you an introduction to freight mobility planning and what's different about these plans compared to other types of planning efforts you might have been a part of in the past. In July, we gave you an update on where we were with our best practices review and also our network analysis, taking a look at how the strategic freight work is shaping up. And thank you very much for everybody's feedback on that strategic freight network for all modes of transportation. And then in August, this last month, we had a presentation of where we were with our land use analysis. And that, to me, was a wonderful conversation, and I'm very, very thankful to have had everyone's input on that data and continue to get that input through emails and other forms of communication. For those of you who aren't aware, we have been doing a series of Lunch and Learn webinars, and the thinking behind that is to educate our stakeholders, educate our public about freight-related issues. And a lot of times within these types of efforts, what we find ourselves running up against is the challenge of educating people about the value of freight, the importance of freight. It's a whole new set of vocabulary words and topics. And so we've been doing these webinars, and I'm happy to get you up to speed that those are all available on our plan websites. So we'll put those up at the end of this presentation, but I really do hope that you will go visit those websites and see 100% of this content, both from our meetings, which have all been recorded, our meeting PowerPoint presentations, as well as these Lunch and Learn webinars, because if any of those topics are interesting to you or colleagues, you may want to share those with others. So moving into today, as mentioned, we're talking about goals, objectives, and performance measures. Krista is going to walk us through this discussion about goals and objectives and some proposed performance measures. And what you'll see is a comparison of other plans that are out there and what we can borrow from those plans, but ultimately what we need from you all today is to review this, comment on it, and make sure that we are making this a Berkeley, Charleston, Dorchester focused set of goals, objectives, and performance measures. And ultimately, this is what's going to hold us accountable as planners, as public agencies, to make sure that we are providing a freight system that supports our community's needs. So please stay dialed in and give us your thoughts and feedback. And we're going to start out with an icebreaker question that I always like to get the answer to, which is, what would you like to see your government or this region together doing during this planning effort to support your business? And it doesn't matter what your business is. It could be a municipality, it could be a trucking company, it could be a distributor. What would you like to see out of this plan that would help your specific business? And please unmute and speak up or type in the chat box. I see a few people typing. That's good. In the past, some of the responses I've seen to this question include things like making improvements more quickly to improve congestion or safety. We sometimes get the response of make land use decisions that are a little more business friendly. Okay, Coleman says he'd like to see educate the driving public regarding the value of transportation both for local economies and the country as a whole. I think that's a good one. Thank you, Coleman. Well, that's one thing we're trying to do with the Lunch and Learns, but it's also something we can continue to do when the plan is complete. Kenny Skipper says he'd like to see the impact of traffic to ease flow of freight in and out of the port terminals. We have an opportunity with the new terminal. Okay. Certainly a good goal, a good positive outcome of a plan like this. I see some more typing happening. And do please feel free to unmute if you'd rather speak than type. And Charles Drayton says he'd like to see better ways to designate, improve, and enforce trucking routes. Okay. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on. We'll go ahead and move through the presentation, but please don't stop typing. If you have more comments or ideas to post there, please go ahead and continue to do that. And that goes throughout this presentation, by the way. I'm getting ready to hand it over to my colleague, Krista Gooden. And please feel free to ask questions at any time. Krista?
Thank you, Jenny, and thank you, everyone. Happy Thursday. I hope everybody's having a beautiful day. So for what Jenny mentioned earlier, and hopefully you recall from one of the earlier presentations that we gave back in June, our freight plan is going to be performance-based, and that is a requirement that the feds have put on for all state DOTs as well as MPO long-range transportation plans. And as part of the performance-based plan, it's a framework for evaluating the performance of these long-range transportation plans, and they're made up of 3 parts. First, the goals, and a goal is a broad statement that defines what we want to accomplish for the regional freight transportation system as a whole. And that's followed on by the objectives, which are an expression of the goals as they relate to specific aspects of the freight system. And objectives are measurable, but not necessarily quantifiable. And finally, we have the performance measure and the target. And these serve to measure the objective with data and technical analysis. So next, we'll get into how we developed the draft goals and objectives. So first, for the goals development, we essentially started with comparing the federal goals from the Fixing America's Surface Transportation, or FAST Act, and we compared them with the South Carolina statewide freight plan goals, in addition to BCD COG's goals as well as CHAP. And we want to ensure that the BCD COG freight goals are compatible with their long-range transportation plan as well as the CHAT's MPO plan. We want to make sure that it's enhancing the existing plan goals, and also the development will then guide how we put together the objectives and the performance measures. This is a list of all the different plans that we reviewed with a link for you to access it on your own. I want to make a note that the South Carolina statewide freight plan update is currently in draft form and has been, it is out for public comment right now. As of July, it was put out for public comment. And so you can take a look at that link and see if you have any particular comments or want to review it. And then we also have links to the BCD COG rural LRTP and the CHAP LRTP. So this table is showing you a comparison of the 4 different plans and the goals. And as you can see, they line up pretty one-on-one. We have goals related to mobility and reliability, also safety, infrastructure condition and preservation, some form of economic vitality or community type goal, an environment goal, and then if you notice under the South Carolina Freight Plan goal, you actually show right here we have a new equity goal that has been incorporated into the update, and which is an aligning with the CHAP's community goal, and then we also have a coordination and best practices goal. So really, it was fairly easy to recommend what the regional freight goals should be for the BCD regional area. Essentially adopt the South Carolina Freight Plan goals, which are already aligned with the regional goals, and include a new equity one. And these are aligned with the federal as well as the state freight goals, and compatible and enhancing the BCD COG's rural LRTP goals by incorporating the new equity, and can easily transition into developing the objectives and measures, performance measures. I'll take a quick little break to see if we have any questions.
which the objectives and usually does shape our eventual recommendations and how we justify and prioritize what those recommendations will look like, and they will need to support these goals. So that's just a little extra perspective on what we do with this list.
Okay. All right, I'll scoot on to objectives. So essentially we did a similar thing with the objectives development. We wanted to make sure that it was compatible with the statewide freight plan and that they were also aligned with similar BCD-COG and CHAT goals and objectives, and make sure that they relate back to the freight goals and that they are measurable but not necessarily quantifiable. So these next couple of slides is giving you a comparison of the different objectives across the BCD-COG and the CHAT LRTP objectives. And so for mobility and system reliability, we had objectives related to improving the existing transportation system, accommodating transit, improving travel time reliability, reducing congestion, things regionally specific like land development patterns, and also looking at opportunities for ride sharing, carpool, and also looking at access management type related activities. For safety, the objectives were fairly compatible, looking at improving roadway safety, looking at the number of and rates of crashes, providing a safe environment, looking at engineering enforcement and education activities, which is part of the Strategic Highway Safety Plan, and also looking at opportunities for identifying hazardous corridors and intersections, as well as bicycle and pedestrian safety. The next goal area was infrastructure condition, and this was incorporating the condition of the roadways in the rural area, and also seeking to maintain or improve pavement conditions, bridge conditions, as well as transit assets. Oops, missed one. For economic and community vitality, we saw some objectives related, again, to adopt and complete and apply the Complete Streets policy, improving transit access to jobs as well as traditionally disadvantaged populations, providing a regional system that incorporates alternatives and solutions for efficient movement, assistance, and freight and economic development growth. And so these two groups are already, you can see the word freight pop up. And so that was exciting to know that the plans are already incorporating the freight mode. The next is protect the environment. The objectives were related to air and water quality and protecting open space, and also minimizing impacts from projects on the natural environment. And then for equity, CHATS had an objective related to engaging under-engaged groups such as emergency response and freight movement stakeholders during the development of the LRTP and other planning processes. So the next couple of slides are what we're recommending to move forward with the objectives. And under each objective in parentheses shows you where that specific objective is coming from. So for mobility and system reliability goal, we're recommending the increased travel time reliability for highway and freight corridors, as well as the encouraged land development and travel patterns that support freight modes. For safety and security, these are going to be related to the number and rate of crashes, fatalities, and serious injuries across all modes. Second, to collaborate with SCDOT to improve roadway safety in the rural areas of the BCD area, and also identify hazardous corridors and intersections in the rural areas of Berkeley, Charleston, and Dorchester County. The next is infrastructure condition, and the goal, or the objective, excuse me, is maintain regionally significant roadways and bridges in a state of good repair. For economic and community vitality goal, we have 3 recommended objectives. Create a resilient network by encouraging improvements and access to redundant roadways on the network. The second one is to provide a regional transportation system that supports the efficient movement of people and freight by addressing freight-specific bottlenecks. And that was a combo that was in the BCD-COG and CHATS plan. And the objective about adopt and apply complete streets policy that specifies steps to identify community context, needs, and recommended design criteria for each transportation project, potential user, and every mode of travel. And the last 2 sets of goals for environmental, the objective to encourage land use planning that supports and promotes the efficient movement of freight and minimize or mitigate project impacts in the region's natural resources. And then for the equity goal, we have 3 recommended objectives. The first 2 were objectives that were identified in the South Carolina Freight Plan to improve or maintain broad-based public participation into all planning and project development processes, and to equity regarding the freight mobility needs of all modes into the prioritization process. So essentially you have, the first one is related to the engagement and making sure we have a broad base of all under-engaged populations into the planning for freight, and then also making sure that the freight mode itself is able to compete equally across all modes in the project prioritization process. And the last objective was taken from CHATS to engage the typically under-engaged groups such as emergency response and freight movement stakeholders during the transportation planning process. Okay. Are there any questions on the objectives before we move into the interactive activity? I'm going to take a look at the chat box. Jenny, did you see anything that popped up in the chat box?
I do see that Rick's posted a couple of things. He says, under congestion, are you recommending cordoning off a separate lane exclusively for rapid bus, i.e. taking an entire lane away, or adding more buses? Also, explain how Complete Streets provides expanded, more efficient freight movements and delivery. So the short answer is we are not yet making recommendations other than shaping the goals, objectives, and the supportive performance measures. And then the next step is putting this together with the network and the land use data that we've presented previously. And then we put all that together and start talking about needs and recommendations. Now, in the area or arena of transit and Complete Streets, there is the Low Country Rapid Transit project that is in the works. And so one thing we have discussed is how best to coordinate with that effort in terms of the appropriate design and traffic operations within that corridor on US 52 and portions of 78 at either end of the corridor. And then I know that in the past that discussion has been on the table for I-26 as well, but certainly that is something that would, because 52 is on our strategic freight network, that is a consideration that needs to be in play in terms of the design and efficient incorporation of bus rapid transit. I do not believe that there will be a dedicated lane for bus at this time. However, those plans may evolve, but at this time I do not believe that there is a dedicated lane throughout the corridor for bus.
Yes, Jenny, this is Sarah with the COG. I'll just add on to what Jenny just said there, based on Rick's question. For our Low Country Rapid Transit corridor, we are looking at partial dedicated fixed guideway along that corridor. And we do want to be mindful of our region and the redundancy of the freight network, which calls out, for example, 52 as well as US 78, and I believe some of US 17. We do have limited network in terms of also our transit framework for our region. So we do know there's going to be some corridors. We will be looking at high capacity transit existing along some of these freight corridors. So we just want to be mindful of that and the users that will be predominant on those corridors.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Okay, I think, if no other questions, are we ready to move into the interactive activity? Let's see, we might have one more
Looks like
question.
Catherine is typing a comment in there. Okay, not seeing any additional comments in the chat box. At this point in the meeting, we're going to start with an interactive activity, and so I'm going to turn it over to Victoria to explain how to use some of the functions on Adobe Connect.
Thanks, Wade. You should see the drawing panel on the right side of your Adobe Connect window with the goals and objectives table. We're going to ask you to use the shape tool, which is, it looks like a square. So if you click that square, you can get other shapes and draw them right on the table on the screen. So for a practice round, let's try selecting the star and drawing some stars anywhere on the page, but particularly in the dot placement column. And then once you practice, I'll go ahead and clear the screen, and Wade can get into the meat of the activity. Great job.
Great. Thank you, Victoria.
Great
All right.
job. I'll clear this out.
Okay, we're going to clear out the screen. Got a couple more stragglers there. All right, here we go, guys. Now that we've seen our draft goals and objectives, we'd like to conduct this exercise to try to prioritize how the region should prioritize these goals and objectives. If you would imagine that I gave you each $5 to distribute across these goals and objectives, and the $5 would be representative of $1 per star, and if you could allocate those stars across goals and objectives, you could place 5 on one goal, or you could slice them and dice them any way you wanted to distribute them across the goals and objectives. This will help us kind of take stock of what the region's priorities are in terms of goals, and can lead into us developing a prioritization framework when we go to do our project and recommendations prioritization. So go ahead and get started with that. All right. Looks like we've got a lot of stars around mobility and system reliability, as well as economic and community vitality. And safety is always a top priority. Thank everybody for their input here. And again, as I said, we'll close out this window, and this information is going to be used in helping us develop our prioritization process, our prioritization framework as we move forward. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Krista to continue the presentation.
Awesome. Thank you, Wade. Thank you, everyone. So next we're going to talk about the draft performance measures and how we came about. So there's 3 functions of performance measures that are plan development, plan implementation, and accountability. And as part of the federal planning requirements, state DOTs and MPOs are required to set performance targets that are consistent with the established national performance measures for freight. Then they are required to integrate those targets within their planning processes and report back to US DOT on their progress. Beyond these federal requirements, though, freight performance measures can also provide the BCD-COG and CHAT with the ability to monitor how well your transportation system is accommodating safe and effective freight movement. And these measures are going to allow for the identification of trends and challenges before they can become problems. And it allows project partners such as you all who can better be prepared and responsive to the private sector needs. So the methodology for drafting the performance measures is first we did a peer review of similar regional freight plans and summarized the applicable measures by goal area. And then next we did a comparison similar to the goals and the objectives where we compared the South Carolina statewide freight plan with the BCD-COG and the CHATS LRTPs, and also took a look at potential rail and incident management performance measures. These are the 3 plans that we looked at. You may be familiar with them from previous presentations about best practices. So we looked at the Greater Charlotte Regional Freight Mobility Plan, the Central Midlands Regional Freight Mobility Plan, and the Miami-Dade County Freight Plan Update. And a quick summary of the measures that we found across those plans. For safety, there were measures related to truck incidents, at-grade crossing crashes, truck parking, as well as security at facilities. For economic, there was truck travel time, hours of truck delay, intelligent transportation system investment, and funding for freight infrastructure. And a note on that, we're starting to see a lot of the more recent freight plans are incorporating a funding or an investment tracking type of performance measure. For infrastructure condition, this is pretty straightforward across most of the freight plans that we see, where you're tracking the interstate and national highway system pavement condition, as well as deficient bridges, weight restrictions, and the number of ITS partnerships and programs. And for environmental, is related to air quality, hours of truck delay, and alternative energy investment. A couple more types of performance measures were reliability, related to truck travel time, bottlenecks, level of service, and intermodal connections. Efficiency, related to the backhaul movements of trucks and hours of truck delay. Coordination, relating to the number of participants of different types of freight outreach activities and the number of freight stakeholder meetings. And then finally, a mode choice related performance measure for designated intermodal connector facilities. So this slide is showing you a comparison of our goal areas with the performance measures found within the South Carolina freight plan, as well as CHATS and BCD-COG. So a little cross-check of where we're seeing performance measures. And as you know, all of the MPOs have already adopted some performance measures and targets related to safety, infrastructure condition, and reliability. So for safety, we saw the number of rate of crashes involving trucks and the number of fatalities. For infrastructure condition, it was related to percent of state-maintained roadway miles in good condition, as well as state-maintained bridges in satisfactory condition. For environmental, it was annual hours of peak excessive delay. For reliability, we see the truck travel time reliability index, the percent of person miles traveled on the interstate system that are reliable, and the percent of primary roadway miles operating at less than LOX for urban areas and at LOX for rural areas. And those were a little bit different depending on the plan. So what we're recommending is to initially adopt the federally required freight performance measures that are included in the South Carolina Freight Plan that are related to the mobility, reliability, safety, infrastructure condition, and the economy and community. Then we're recommending to make sure that they are aligned with what SCDOT is already analyzing. That will allow the BCD-COG and CHATS to be able to streamline the data collection and analysis. We know from working with multiple jurisdictions that sometimes the number of staff that is available and the planning time can vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So when we're talking about data collection and analysis, that can be pretty heavy. We like to see where we can streamline that with state agencies that are already collecting that information for you all. And then finally, adding regionally specific measures such as the Complete Streets policy and at-grade crossing incidents. So next, the next couple of slides will be the proposed performance measures. So it's going to be by goal area, and in the middle is the specific performance measure. What's in bold is the actual measure or data point that would be collected, and finally the data source to the far right column. For mobility and system reliability, we're recommending the Truck Travel Time Reliability Index. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that particular measure, it's the amount of reliable time that it takes to get from point A to point B that you can depend on. The second performance measure would be related to level of service, and this is what was identified in both the South Carolina Freight Plan and BCD-COGS plan, is the proportion of South Carolina's interstate mileage that operates at less than a level of service E for urban areas and level of service C for rural areas. The next set of performance measures for safety and security is the number of large trucks reported in crashes organized by fatal, non-fatal, injury reported, and hazardous materials, and looking at 5-year trends. And this particular measure is a little bit streamlined in the South Carolina Freight Plan from previous safety measures. We're recommending adding a number of public and private truck parking spaces available. We know that that is an ongoing issue in metro areas as yourselves, and so thought it would be great to start tracking that. And then finally, the at-grade crossing crashes. The next goal area is infrastructure condition, and this is pretty straightforward. What everyone is already tracking, percent of miles of interstate and national highway system rated at good or higher condition, and then a percent of miles of non-interstate on the regional freight network rated at good or higher condition, and the percent of deficient bridge deck area. For the economic and community vitality goal, we're recommending the Truck Travel Time Reliability Index again, and adding in the annual hours of truck delay on the freight corridors, and looking at the proportion of system miles on the regional freight network improved in accordance with the Complete Streets policy. Okay. And then the last one is environmental, and we're recommending going with the performance measures that CHATS is already measuring, is the maintaining a percent change of vehicle miles traveled at or below population growth rate, and the annual hours of truck delay on freight corridors. And as you may have noticed, we have not identified proposed performance measures for the equity goal as of yet. The draft South Carolina Freight Plan currently only has identified objectives for the equity goal, not performance measures yet. And we really thought this would be an opportunity to have a discussion and a chat with you all to see what you think would be a good way to track equity in a performance measure way for the freight plan. And so if we don't have any specific questions on
Krista,
this,
you
I'm
got
going
a
to,
question from
yeah.
Steve Thigpen in the chat box about the importance of using bridge deck area versus the number of bridges. And so,
So that, oh, you want to take it?
I will just say the federal metric requires the states to report the deficient bridge deck area. The state's 10-year plan, which is a different document in its entirety, actually tracks the structurally deficient bridges, and so that's a different tracking mechanism as a part of a different plan. But as far as the federal metric is concerned, it's bridge deck area, and that is what would be monitored as a part of this reporting process. So to streamline that reporting process to the feds.
Thanks, Wade. Hopefully, even that answered your question. Okay. Oh, I think Rick Todd had a question. Is time of day tied to this data and are at-fault determinations considered? So I will say that I'm thinking you're discussing the safety performance measures, the safety and security. I will say that at-fault determinations right now, what the state is currently tracking is fatal, non-fatal, injury reported, and hazardous materials. I believe that the Strategic Highway Safety Plan digs in a little bit more into the crash data, but as far as what we're recommending to be tracking, not the at-fault piece. Okay, let's see. The truck travel time reliability per the time of day. We are recommending that will be, actually, Wade, do you know if the time of day is incorporated into that particular index formula?
I believe the reliability index is a measure of the percent, like you have to fall into like the 85th percentile of the truck travel time reliability index for that that period of time. So it would be like a peak period for determining that.
Y'all are welcome to go off mute instead of typing in the chat box if it
Well,
makes
and
it a little easier.
I'll also make the point of these are draft recommendations for performance measures. So please, if you have feelings or concerns about any of these, that's what we're here to discuss. In terms of the travel time reliability index, you can get the data by time of day. You can get it by month of the year. There are lots of different ways to slice and dice the data. The idea, however, is to make it something that is valuable to the industry as well as valuable to planners so that we're able to make reasonable recommendations that support efficiency. So if it's, it could be off-peak time that we care about. It could be peak time, AM and PM peak that we are concerned about. We do have the flexibility there to consider those.
Okay.
Any additional questions?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Krista.
All right.
And Rick, to your point, before we move on, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Wade. But to your point there, Rick, that you've messaged, that commuting peak time is certainly very different from the rest of the day, and we regularly see that when we are doing traffic studies. Whenever we're getting into, say, an interstate widening project or an interchange replacement project, I mean, we're involved in one right now where you look at the data and trucks aren't a problem at all. However, we know that there are a lot of trucks using that interchange, but they don't show up during the peak time, AM and PM peaks. So there is a very clear differential that we're aware of. So if you'd like us to consider one period versus another, please let us know. But the whole goal of, and Krista mentioned it, and we have it typed there, but the goal of using that reliability index is, over the years we've used level of service and A, B, C, D, that all makes sense to people. However, reliability allows you to plan, and it tells your drivers, this is the better time of day to drive, and I can most often get through here at this time of day. Because if you go by level of service, we would probably have 20 lanes each way on the interstate, so which we know is not practical. But that's the goal of moving in that direction. Okay, sorry, Wade.
Thanks.
Go ahead.
That's all right. Thanks, Jenny. All right. We were going to start with the final exercise here to discuss some of the goals and objectives and performance measures that we've developed as a part of the project development. So equity was proposed as a part of the statewide freight plan goals, and so there weren't any performance measures that are currently proposed as a part of that process. And so we wanted to have a little bit of a discussion about equity in terms of the times and the environment we're in currently. And so we wanted to beg the question of what does equity mean for transportation? And so a graphic's been provided to the right of the screen that shows, illustrates the definition of equality versus equity. And you can see three folks there, various heights, trying to view the baseball game, and their views being blocked by the fence. And so equality is looking at providing the same accommodations to different groups, and that might not meet the needs of each specific individual, versus equity, where we've provided a specific accommodation based off of that person or group's area, and that's allowed them to view the game. And so when we talk about this equity issue as it relates to transportation and how it's been quantified in terms of the state freight plan and other planning efforts, we're looking at what does equity mean for transportation to this group, to this freight advisory committee, and we're looking to get some feedback from you on that. In terms of equity, that could be related to environmental justice communities or providing equity to communities impacted by freight. It could also mean how do we bring freight to the table and provide equity to freight as a mode? And I think that's where the complete streets discussion and context sensitivity discussion has kind of entered into some of the work we've been doing on developing performance measures. So we'd like to get the Freight Advisory Committee's thoughts on those items. Feel free to type your responses into the chat box or unmute your phone, and we can have a discussion about that. Like Rick and Coleman are typing in the chat box. Okay. Coleman says, equity might mean equal access for all users. Personal vehicles outnumber trucks, but trucks outweigh personal vehicles. So accordingly, 80% of truck personal vehicle crashes responsibility is assigned to the personal vehicle. So get to the bottom of the comment there. Yet trucks are considered the problem. How should we address that? Okay. So we need to look at equity in terms of, I guess, mode share on the roadway and what that means in terms of its implications to safety and how that impacts, I guess, Coleman stating they're considered the problem, so they're the reputation for trucks being considered the problem on the roadways. Rick has commented, complete streets resulting in reducing road capacity is not equitable. And so I think, Rick, to your point that in terms of the complete streets discussion, there may be that it's kind of lopsided in terms of when we use the terminology with complete streets, that a lot of people are focusing on transit and bikes and pedestrian traffic, and complete streets in this context can also mean truck and freight traffic. So when we're designing roadways, the context sensitivity there, if it's on a portion of the freight network, we need to make sure that we preserve through design elements incorporating truck traffic and accommodations for freight traffic in that design. See, Sarah and Charles are typing in the chat box. Rick, I had the opportunity to work on the Broad Street Road Diet that was proposed off of US 521 in Camden, South Carolina. And there was definitely a conflict there in terms of how that would impact freight movements in the region. So I think road diets, projects like those are definitely where those considerations need to be made. Charles says, equity for freight transportation to me would be providing lanes throughout the designated freight network that are optimally designed for freight and possibly designated to freight exclusively. It's a great comment, Charles. And so at this point in time, SCDOT has not suggested performance measures for equity. So some of these ideas that are being proposed, are there ways that we can track that? Has anybody given any thought to, I think at the heart of the discussion is how do we get a seat at the table and start to facilitate that discussion? Sarah with BCD COG has commented, I lend that for parts of our region where we are redeveloping, we need to be mindful that we are not designing freight out of the network and then making freight becoming a nuisance. A great comment, Sarah. Got another comment coming from Coleman.
Okay.
Go ahead, Jenny.
Well, while Coleman's typing, I was just going to add to the discussion about complete streets and road diets. There's a lot of discussion in the industry about the omission of freight considerations in complete streets. And, a number of years ago, BCD COG did the Neck Area Master Plan that had a freight mobility component to it, where there was sort of it was really an organization of roadways where some corridors were designated for projects like road diets. That's where the Sproul Avenue road diet came from, with the intention of preserving other corridors for freight mobility, so that you're not in a position where you're prohibiting trucks. However, you're really attracting them to the corridor that is better designed and more efficiently connecting the origins and destinations for them. So I can't restate enough that this is the time to have that dialogue and discuss those topics, because complete streets they're a widely accepted, used tool. I believe the complete streets policy is still in place within BCD COG. And I think it's very important to hear from this group about how to interpret that and how to use it best to make sure it is equitable for all modes of transportation, including trucks. So I appreciate the conversation and documentation of your thoughts and questions here.
I think we're getting some good feedback that that equity is not, that equity is about getting freight movement and freight modes a seat at the table. Coleman has responded with, equity should involve the funding questions from where does the money originate to address the competing needs. And so we haven't, at this time, proposed any objectives or performance measures which track funding from a preliminary source to a programmatic point to where it reaches the local tip or the STIP, but that is something that could be tracked in terms of how the various project buckets at SCDOT and at the COG and MPO level are invested. Rick has made the comment, funding is a legislative issue. I think you see as things have progressed with this statewide 10-year plan, there's obviously been an increase in funding after the gas tax increase was passed, and the Berkeley, Charleston, Dorchester area is doing a lot of progressive things in terms of local option sales tax for transportation that have been helping to fund projects in that area. But I do think you know, when we talk about performance measures, we want to make sure that those measures are providing data points that we can track and easily collect. And so in terms of a performance measure for tracking how funding is applied, I think that is something that could potentially be done in showing how funding sources are related to the uses and programming at the STIP level and going into the project delivery process and how quickly projects are delivered to the region. Great discussion, everyone. I'm going to go on to our next set of questions, and just to kind of wrap up the discussion, I know we went through a laundry list of goals and objectives through the discussion, and so to build off of that, are there any additional areas which we haven't tracked as a goal area or a metric to measure performance that you think that we should be proposing in the plan? This would be the time for us to record those comments and take those under consideration. And then just to kind of wrap things up, going back to the question that we asked at the very beginning of the presentation, it's good to think of that in terms of what can your government or your region do to track performance and support the business environment. Got a couple of folks commenting in the chat box. I think too, as you guys being representative of different boards or bodies or elected bodies, you know, feel free to speak on behalf of what you're feeling those representatives are telling you. And again, with your experience in the industry, what are you hearing out there on the streets from all of your counterparts? Rika says, freight is fundamental, so taxes and user fees must be imposed and collected in the most cost-effective manner. So if funding methods are suggested by a group other than this user group, then it should be vetted here, i.e. low cost of administration. So Coleman has said, the recent virus disruption highlighted the necessity of transportation in our society. Local governments need to recognize the transportation component and expend some efforts to promote versus attempt to constrain. I think, Coleman, that kind of relates to that resiliency item, which we've had some discussion in some of our freight meetings about supply chain immunity, which also has that resiliency component in order to measure how the DOT and the region, local governments are reacting and assessing risk and their ability to react quickly to certain risks, and to also, I think also the industry itself has to look at ways to provide immunity from different disruptions like COVID-19. I've seen some recent articles that talk about developing numerous options for supply bases, and talks about developing manufacturing locations and various locations, so that if one particular geography is struck with an item, then another area can pick up and carry the load for them. Okay, great comments, folks. At this point, I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap things up. So I will turn things back over to Jenny.
Thanks, Wade, and thanks, Krista, for your presentations and conversation today. Again, just being mindful of everybody's time. I really appreciate the conversation that we've generated today. Thank you for your feedback. Please continue to provide that. Summarize it in an email or even just in bullet points over to Sarah as your reaction, your thoughts about today's discussion and the materials that you've been reviewing. Looking ahead to next month, our next meeting will be October 8th, where we will be receiving a presentation about the economic impact analysis. So a lot of the conversation today, I think, will be highlighted by that, giving us the value of freight movements into, out of, and through our region. If you missed today's lunchtime webinar about that commodity flow analysis, I strongly encourage you to watch that. We'll get that recording over to Sarah here very soon, so she can post that online. It's very interesting, and a big thank you to SCDOT and the Ports Authority for coordinating with us on that effort, providing data and some validation discussion on those. And then just keep doing what you're doing. Please stay connected through the plan website. Please stay connected through Sarah at BCDCOG. We'll continue to provide content to push out through social media and the plan website so that you can continue to share that with your colleagues, constituents, boards of directors, commissioners, elected officials, and others. So thank you so much for your time today. And Sarah, do you have any last minute, any comments to make as we wrap up today?
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone. I think we had great conversation today. Yes, and please pass along any comments to us. And I do want to go back to, I think Mr. Skipper rounded off our comments with saying we've looked at the roadways, etc., the truck traffic. And he did ask, how do we incorporate rails and the crossing into our impact to the freight mobility in our region? So we are going to be looking at that. And keep the conversation going. I'm available. If I can't answer any questions or provide information, I'll definitely pass you on to members of the team that can address anything you need to know. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon.